There we go. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Planning Commission meeting this January 2nd, 2018. We have a full quorum of commissioners present this evening, and we have business items to take care of at the beginning, and we welcome the public and hope you find the meeting enjoyable. First item of business, oath of office for new and reappointed commissioners. So we have Matt Quinney and Corbin England. If you could please step down from the dais and see Melanie Briggs for the official swearing in.
Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your names.
I, Corbin,
Do solemnly swear that I will support, obey, and defend
support, obey, and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Utah
and the Constitution of the State of Utah
and the laws and ordinances
and the laws and ordinances
of the City of West Shore,
of the City of West Shore,
and I will discharge the duties
and I will discharge the duties
of my office with fidelity.
of my office with fidelity.
Official. Congratulations, Corbin. Congratulations, Matt. Don't leave yet. Don't leave. I need your signature.
Sign your life away now.
Okay. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie.
You betcha.
Great. Congratulations, Commissioners England and Quinney. Thanks for your service. And we recognize City Council members in attendance this evening. Thank you for being here. Second item of business, we have election of chair and vice chair for 2018. So let's open the conversation for nominations for chairperson. Commissioner Quinney.
I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that we nominate you to continue in your role as our chairman.
Commissioner Luthi.
I want to second that.
Thank you. I'll accept the nomination. Thank you for your trust. Any other nominations for the role of chair for 2018? Seeing none, we'll close the conversation and vote. By acclamation. Yes, Duncan Murray.
I think if you had a motion to appoint by acclamation, that would be great.
Sorry, could you say that one more time?
Well, if you just have a motion at this point, you've nominated so far, and if somebody now just makes a motion. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Right side.
I move to appoint by acclamation.
Thank you. Let's vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously 7-0. Thank you again for your continued trust. Commissioner Hansen.
Yes, I would like to nominate for vice chair Mr. Quinney. As he's sitting right next to you, the chair wouldn't be hard to change.
For efficiency, right? Commissioner Hatch. Great. We have the nomination of Commissioner Quinney by Commissioner Hansen and seconded by Commissioner Hatch. Commissioner Green.
I move that we close nominations and move to appoint by acclamation.
Any discussion to that motion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously 7-0.
Thank you.
Third item of business, the appointment of 2 commissioners to the Design Review Committee. In the pre-meeting, we discussed the potential appointment of Commissioner Quinney and Commissioner England. Do we have additional discussion to those appointments this evening? Commissioner Hansen.
Yes, which committee was this on?
This would be Design Review Committee.
Thank you.
Does this need a formal motion?
We should have a motion for the appointments, please.
I move that we appoint from this body Commissioner Quinney and Commissioner England to the Design Review Committee.
Commissioner Hansen.
I'll second that.
Thank you. We have a motion by Commissioner Green, second by Commissioner Hansen. Any discussion of that motion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. Business item number 4, appointment of 1 commissioner to serve on the CDBG Home Committee. Commissioner Hansen.
Yes, I'd like to nominate Commissioner Hatch for that position.
Thank you. Commissioner Quinney.
I'd second that motion.
A motion by Commissioner Hanson, a second by Commissioner Quinney. Any discussion to that motion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously 7-0. And we'd like to mention also that Commissioner Luthi continues to serve on the General Plan Committee. Commissioner Quinney.
I was just going to make a motion to approve the minutes. I'm just getting a little ahead of you.
Well, thank you. Business item number 5, approval of the minutes from December 19th, 2017, as contained in the staff packet. Commissioner Quinney. Let's go to Commissioner Luthi, please.
I'd like to second that.
We have a motion by Commissioner Quinney, a second by Commissioner Luthi. Any discussion to that motion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously 7-0. That's a lot of motions, a lot of voting. It's only taken 5 minutes.
We're efficient.
Very good, which brings us to item number 6 on our agenda this evening, public hearing for Upper West Apartments, 3283 West, Jordan Line Parkway. Preliminary site plan, PC zone, TSOD. Jordan Valley Station 5, LLC, is the applicant. Is the applicant here this evening? Please feel free to come forward and present your application. If you could please state your name for the public record.
Thank you very much, Commissioners. My name is Robert Miller. I'm with Studio PVA, 1575 Gilpin Street, Denver, Colorado.
Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much for having us here again this evening. We'd like to discuss the apartments at the Jordan Valley Station. So the station is right here in this location. The subject tonight is Building 5, also known as Lot 6. I know that's confusing, of the Jordan Valley Transportation Overlay District at this location. So this is a rendering of the building that we are proposing for this location. This is at the corner as we come in off of 3200 here. So this will be the leasing corner. So we are proposing a building that has a mix of materials, metal siding, a little bit of concrete here at the base, storefront, 2-story leasing space, really kind of a dramatic and focal point entryway into the overall master development and leading to the transit station. So from the townhome discussion that we had 2 weeks ago, there were several points that came up during that discussion. The first point of discussion that came up from that was open space, how much open space is being provided, how open space is counted. So we did a quick diagram of the overall master development area, which includes all of this area here. This is Novi, the UTA parking garage at this location. So there is a plaza that is built as part of Novi coming in off of the light rail station. Then Novi has several private open spaces. One has a pool at varying degrees of fences, etc., but they are all courtyard open spaces. We just showed a limited amount for the townhomes here. Once again, this would be the pool courtyard, and then the development that we're proposing here, which has a pool courtyard at this location, a little public plaza at this leasing center, entryway, etc. So I just wanted to highlight that the requirement for the overall master development is a total open space of 10%. And currently, based upon the amount of open spaces, both built out, part of the proposal for the townhomes, part of the proposal for the apartments, and then the trail and adjacent open space that will be developed as part of the trail system, we're currently at 17% open space for the overall master development. That doesn't include any open space that would continue to be developed as a part of the other parcels as they're developed throughout this district. Within our property itself, as I said, we have highlighted the areas that we are counting towards the open space here. So we have the pool courtyard space, an active courtyard space here, another one off of the street, and then this public entryway plaza to the leasing center here. So we're not counting any of the green space that's around the rest of the building, the park strip, tree lawns, et cetera, around this property. For this property itself, we are at 19% open space when we limit it to these more active programmed use spaces. Another question came up in the town home discussion about potential development of retail as the master plan continues to be built out. So this is the town home site. This is the site for the apartments that we're talking about tonight. Additional town home space currently planned or conceptualized for lot 8, senior housing facilities on 9 and 10. And then we can see the commercial lots that start with 1, 2, 13, 12, 11 that have the potential to be developed as demand increases for commercial space throughout this. And then the potential space here at lot 14 as well for commercial space once demand will support having retail at those locations. So those are all the areas that are conceptualized for commercial / retail or potentially office as well. So to get into the plan of the apartment project itself, we have a 1-story parking garage. There's about 10 feet of fall between these two corners of the site. So at this end of the site, the parking or the garage is exposed completely out of grade, and this is where we have that 2-story leasing volume space that you saw in the renderings. We have the entryway as low as we can for vehicle parking, parking inside, bicycle parking, etc. And then this corner is completely buried below grade as grade is coming up on the two sides around the project. So when we get into the courtyard here, this space right here is completely accessible from grade. We don't have a building connection here. We do have a bridge on the upper levels here. So there will be a fence here to prevent the public from wandering into the pool courtyard itself. But once again, just completely open space, amenity space here, continuing into that leasing center, that volume space here. Vertical circulation gets you up to this level. Another little courtyard here, elevated above the street, looking here. Then we have the main building entry, cyber cafe, fitness, once again on the street frontage here, mail center, club room with an indoor-outdoor fireplace, outdoor living room type of space here with this great visibility as we come up to the building from the main entry point there. So just a lot of amenities, a lot of design connecting all the spaces together. Then we have up on the 5th level of the building a rooftop deck here with a little bit of indoor space and all completely outdoor. So once again, as we go back and we look at that rendering of the site, we've got that 2-story leasing space, and then we've got that great rooftop deck amenity. Once again, just creating a great focal point and entryway into the overall master development. So another issue that came up during the discussion of the townhomes was the traffic light here at 3200 West. This is taken from the traffic study. As you can see, we've developed about 40% or so of the units for this overall site. So at this juncture, the traffic study says that the light would not be warranted. It will be warranted later on as we continue to develop more sites in this. And this takes into account both the townhomes and then the apartments here. Elevations here, if you have questions specifically about those, we can go through those. Once again, just a nice contemporary design, not trying to be too showy, but just create a nice backdrop, an elegance to this neighborhood, and really letting this corner be a showcase piece here with this activation and amenity. I'll skip the summary here and just jump to the last slide here, which talks a little bit about the visitor parking. So we labeled in our application that we were parking at one spot for visitors for every 10 units. That was taken at one juncture from the zoning that this overlaid, where guest parking was required to be one stall per 10 dwelling units. And then from the Jordan Valley Crew Development Plan, this is the breakout into 24 by 36 master development plan, which shows each one of these as you do the math here. So there's 204 units. in this chart on our site, 21 visitor parking spots required. So once again, the development plan itself required 1 parking spot for every 10 visitors, referencing back to this, to the code. I don't know at what juncture it was changed to 1 in 4, but the development plan itself clearly shows and states that the parking shall be at 1 space per 10 dwelling units. So that was the basis of which we submitted our application for. We weren't intending that our application have to ask for something additional or a waiving of the 1 to 4 requirement. We thought and maintain that we are in compliance with the master development plan as previously approved. So we are 1 visitor parking spot per 10 dwelling units. Additionally, we think that this is absolutely appropriate for this site. We are within 500 feet of a light rail stop. We've got ample transportation around it. This is a site that's supposed to encourage walkability. It's a site in a district that is meant to encourage leaving the car behind or not having a car at all, and to create a different lifestyle that frankly a lot of people are looking for. So we think this is the right application and the right solution for this site. So with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Great, thank you for your comprehensive presentation. Commissioner Green.
So this will go back to something that you had up on the board. If the idea is that people are supposed to give up their cars to live here, how do they go shopping without any retail in your area?
Retail, once again, will be developed. And there is at least 1 car parking spot per dwelling unit. So it is not as though a household has to give up a parking or give up a car in order to have a unit here. What it does maintain is that households that would say that they need 2, 3, or 4 cars, this isn't the type of development, and this isn't the location for a family that needs that type of household. This is really encouraging people to live with a 1 car per household environment, and in which case they can easily still drive to groceries. Whether a grocery store will eventually be developed in this area, I think we would all love to have a grocery store developed in this area. And once we get enough people and households living under the roofs in this area, I think you will see that type of commercial develop within this neighborhood.
Based on the staff report, so I want you to clarify, how tall are these 5-story buildings?
These buildings are, I forget what it is in the staff report off the top of my head, slightly over 50.
Staff report says 63 feet 8 inches on lots 1 and 2. But it doesn't say specifically about this one.
Yeah, I apologize. That's not a number I have off the top of my head. I do know, generally speaking, it is 4 stories. So that's going to be slightly over 40 feet. That's going to be about 42 feet. So when we get to this area and that height, we probably get in slightly over 55 feet. And we can come back and label that for you.
Mr. Page.
Just for clarification, the maximum height allowed or proposed for these apartments is 63 feet 8 inches. Just for comparison, the buildings on lots 1 and 2 have a maximum building height of 57 feet 7 inches and 53 feet 6 inches.
But let me ask this: 63 feet 8 inches exceeds the maximum building height allowed in the last master plan unless we approve it. Did we see anything in this report that said we were going to approve something that exceeded the allowed in the master plan? I don't see that as a...
I read it as the staff report says the maximum building height allowed in the master plan, and in this plan is 60 feet, and it's up to 80 feet with planning commission approval.
Right, but if this building's going to be 63 feet 8 inches, then it's going to be 3 feet 8 inches higher than the master plan approval, which would require this planning commission's approval, and I don't see that as part of any recommendation to change the master plan. Am I off base there, City Attorney?
No.
That's correct. That's my understanding, is it would require planning commission approval. Yeah. Doesn't require that you approve it, but you can approve it. Unless the city planners
So it's
read
63, it's 60
the ordinance otherwise.
Okay, so at 63 feet 8 inches, we would have to make a separate approval on this, correct?
Or you could,
Part of
with
the
the
same
approval of
motion.
the site plan, you would be approving this building.
Commissioner Luthi.
Hi, I had a couple questions. One was in the open space discussion that you had about it being 19%, and you talked about a lot of that was amongst the trail area. Is the trail area dedicated usable trail space, or is it a trail and then areas that have gotten to be too steep to be able to develop on?
They are not too steep to develop on. Perhaps, Scott, do you want to address I'll have Scott address the
And Scott, could you please state your full name and address for the record, please?
Scott Roque at 4179 Riverboat Road, Suite 200 in Taylorsville with Somas Civil Engineering Firm. The open space highlighted in green that represents the area where the trail is basically in what's considered the floodplain of the creek, and so it's all at a lower level. It's not very steep at all. The trail is designed to be alongside the creek area, and the landscaping area will be enhanced. Some of the native vegetation that's in there will be cleared out.
So it's not buildable, but it is usable space as opposed to a lot of those
usable,
steep
yes.
slope areas that are considered open space. with
It's
the
not
nice
steep
green
slopes
and
at all.
on.
It's actually
Okay.
flatter, lower land. So
Okay.
the
Okay.
trail will be a 14-foot wide asphalt trail, and the grades don't really exceed 3 or 4% on the
Okay, that answers that one. My next question that I had was the storefront area you were talking about, that I think you mentioned a cafe was in there. Is that like just a resident-only use space, or are you anticipating that there's going to be customers coming from elsewhere to try to use some of this space?
No, this would be amenity for the residents only
Okay.
and their guests.
Okay. And then my last question was about the discussion on the parking. You talked about those 21 stalls. Those are all interior to your parking garage. Those are not street parking, correct?
No, there is, some of them is street parking.
Because you had in one of your, go over another one, in one of your little, I was reading on your tables.
Oh, I've lost myself in this.
No, it wasn't that table. It was a bigger table. No?
No? Okay, because this is where we talked about.
There was another one on there that had talked about it, that talked about how much was required and how much you're providing, and none of it, it said 0 on streets. So that's why I was confused as to what was going on with that.
Yeah, okay, I don't know exactly what part you were referencing. It might be somewhere we're talking about code, but the JV TOD does specifically allow street parking to count towards visitor parking requirements.
So how much are you planning on putting on the street?
We have 21 spaces, I believe, on street.
Oh, that 21 was not the entire amount of guest parking, or that 21 was the amount you're putting on the street?
The 21 is how many parking spaces are parallel parking spots that are on the street.
And how many guest parking spots are you putting inside the parking garage?
So this will be a misleading answer. 0 of the required visitor parking spots are located within the garage. They are those street parking spots. However, the way that these apartments typically function is that if you have a visitor, you will oftentimes let them inside the garage to find a parking spot as well, depending upon whether there's assigned parking spots or not. So that visitor parking is going to be flexible. Sometimes that visitor parking will be on the street, sometimes it will be in the garage.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And I believe there was another slide. I'm not finding it in the staff packet, but there was one that we saw that had highlighted on the top left-hand corner with yellow. The one that you were mentioning about 10, and then the code was changed to 4. But
Yeah, so that might be.
Where is that one? There it is, right there.
So, right, so this right here, once again, this is an excerpt from the JVTOD, which was approved quite some time ago. As you can see, it also has, and we came pretty close to this number, it guessed that there would be 204 units on this site. We're at 206. So this was an attempt to demonstrate during the JVOT what could be on each site, how many units would be on each site, how many parking spots would be on each site, etc. This isn't how the plan itself is developing. There will be some deviations from this as we get into some of these buildings where now there are going to be townhomes instead of residential wraps. So there's a number of ways in which the overall project has deviated from this table. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Commissioner Green.
So the way that you read the development plan with the guest parking at one stall for every 10 dwelling units, you assumed that that was on-street parking and that you didn't have to provide, and I'm going to make this a compound question, and that you didn't have to provide any dedicated visitor parking for this complex. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is not what we are trying to say. This codified that there had to be one space per every 10 dwelling units. In this particular case, the parking that was provided, there was assumed to be 0 street parking provided for that plan. That's not the plan that has developed at this juncture. At this juncture, there has been on-street parking that has been developed throughout this master plan. Okay. And the JVTOD specifically says that you can use on-street parking to meet parking requirements. So, once again, we're not specifically saying that the street parking is going to be dedicated to visitors. We're taking the lump sum of the parking that is required, both for the dwelling units as well as for the visitors, and we are saying we are providing, as a part of this project, enough parking for those 2 items. Whether some residents park on the street and some visitors park in the garage, we are not dictating where they park.
So, to get down to brass tacks, you have only for these apartments, there is no dedicated. I'm going to say I want you to throw off the on-street parking. There are no dedicated visitor parking spots for this complex.
That is not a true statement. The answer to that question, once again, is more complicated than saying that there are dedicated or not dedicated parking spots.
So
there is not assigned parking spots inside the garage for tenants. It is a first-come, first-served needed basis. So there are not parking spaces that specifically said you cannot park here as a visitor.
So with that logic in mind, that means that you assume that the residents will use the street parking as much as a visitor would be.
Yeah, we are not saying that a resident cannot park on the street parking that's provided.
And so to clarify, if there's not a dedicated stall for each unit, potentially you could have residents, as was mentioned, have 3, 4, or 5 vehicles if they have a large family, but there's nothing to keep people from bringing in more than 1 vehicle per unit.
In theory, yes, but there are lease agreements that will be signed that will limit the number of cars that could potentially be had by a tenant.
And in that lease agreement, will there be a requirement to stipulate which vehicle is attributable to that unit, and if it changes at any time with the sale of a car, the new license plate will be given? I mean, how do you track that?
Yes is the answer to that question.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Green, do you have other questions? Commissioner Hanson.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. Number 1, you say 1 parking unit, 1 parking stall per unit.
No,
so you're assuming single people are going to live there.
Wait,
because if a husband and wife live there, they're each going to have a car. So you're assuming all of these apartments are going to be occupied by single people with 1 car.
There is more than 1 parking spot provided per dwelling unit. The number is about 1.3 to 1. So there are in excess of 1 space per dwelling unit provided.
Going to be kind of hard to park a car in 0.3.
So for most of the, once again, you have to get into the unit mix and what is the parking requirement by. So the city code requires, let's see if I can find this on here. Studios be parked at 1 per unit. Urban 1 bedrooms, which are basically 1 bedrooms, parked at 1 per unit. 1 bedrooms be parked at 1 per unit, and then 2 bedrooms be parked at 1.5 per unit. So this would assume that half of the 2-bedroom units would have an additional car, or there would be an allowance for half of the 2-bedroom units that have an additional car, to look at a different way. So that is more than the one parking space per unit. In TOD sites that we have developed, both here in Salt Lake City as well as in Denver and other parts of the country, we have found that this ratio of 1.3 to 1 roughly is adequate parking for this type of development. That the days of a husband and wife owning 2 cars is dwindling. We do have allowance that some of those people will still be able to rent here, but we have found that a lot of those people are not choosing to rent here, and that we really do have 1-car households. We even have households that have 0 cars. And this is encouraging that. It's located at a site that is meant to encourage that. It is located directly adjacent to a transit station. So this is exactly what we are planning for, what the code was written for. This is from city code. So this we are supporting both the intent of the master development, of the zoning, and of this development, this type of development.
Okay, my second question is, I have 3, I'm sorry. This is a UTA garage. It doesn't belong to Boulder
This is a
Development.
UTA garage.
Yeah.
The garage that we're building underneath this building.
Belongs to Boulder.
Right.
Okay, so if they park in the UTA garage, is there a charge or is it free, do you know?
It's free.
On all levels, or just the first level?
What about overnight?
Huh? The ground level is restricted. The upper levels are free.
Overnight and everything?
I don't know. We can find the answer to that question, but as a visitor, and once again, this is not being fully utilized for parking. I don't know how many people would want to visit here and park there. I think potentially they could. There is an overlapping use here, so it certainly makes sense for people to park there. But if they're visitor parkings, the likelihood of them parking overnight is very minimal at best.
And then my third question is a safety question. You're allowing 21 parking stalls on the street. That is a narrow street. That is where if you're going to park on the north side, you're going to have to cross the tracks. There is a crossing there. I'm aware of that. There was a girl killed there before they fixed that. But it's still a safety question. In order to get to this, they've got to cross those tracks.
No. The tracks are right here.
Isn't that the street you're saying they can park on?
This garage right here, this is our site. The parallel parking spots I was talking about are on this street.
Okay.
So they're directly adjacent to this property.
So you're not parking out on a public street?
This is a public.
I mean a public street such as the one that runs along the tracks.
Right, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned that the developments that you've had in different locations have a comparable parking ratio, 1.3. Are those that you're speaking of, are they of a comparable size, and are they located near public transit?
Yes. At 206, this is one of the smaller ones we've developed. Usually the projects that we have developed or have worked on are 300 to 350 units. And they are directly adjacent to in Denver, for instance, light rail is what we call it, but also bus transit stops as well. So there's bus transit stops that are servicing the site as well as the tracks.
Okay, thank you, because as you can tell, our question centers on parking, but thank you for having public town hall meetings to be able to get some public input, as well as you were mentioning the open space around the perimeter. That's not being counted in the overall open space that you are dedicating. Is that correct? Just want to double check that, because I know that we have had many discussions on that. If you can't kick a soccer ball or throw a frisbee and it's a 1 foot wide corridor, that makes it hard to really be usable open space. A question for you on these amenities: do you have a projected timeline on when they will be developed in relation to the overall project itself?
Do you want to field that one? No.
Because that's another topic that we've had to address, an ongoing concern of units being built, but amenities not keeping pace with the residents that move in.
I understand. So the economic model that has historically worked in this type of development is you bring the households in first, and when there's a critical mass of people who live in this neighborhood, then the services will follow. And we have seen time and time again, people try, jurisdictions, developers, whomever it is, try to build first floor, ground floor retail as part of the very first project. And that space, 90% of the times, that's empty and really becomes a detraction to the overall development. Commercial is leery of moving into that area because they see empty commercial storefronts at that location. People see a cold, dark shell at night, and it creates safety concerns for them. And it just doesn't create an environment where people see a successful, thriving community. When we have enough residential people living in this area, we will have a thriving residential neighborhood, and commercial will want to come here. They will be banging on the door of Boulder Ventures to build out the commercial parks. But we have to reach that critical mass first, and trying to get there first has rarely, if ever, succeeded.
And more specifically, meaning a swimming pool or a clubhouse with the workout facilities.
Sorry.
No, but that's important too. Thank you.
I think the swimming pool and all of those
Yeah,
internal features will be built when the apartment is constructed, because it's right in the center. It'd be very difficult to build it afterwards, and so it'll be part of the initial development. Just like in Novi, the pool was part of that initial development. So no, there won't be a waiting time for these amenities in the courtyard and such. It'll all be from day one. They'll be installed. So
Great, thank you, Mr. Gardner. Commissioner Green.
Go back to the big map that shows all the lots in this development.
is this the one you're referencing?
No, keep going. No, keep going. Yeah, the one with that one.
Nope.
So the townhome project that we looked at a couple of weeks ago, which lot was it on?
Lot 5.
And are you counting any of the off-street parking that you counted in Lot 5 for your off-street parking in Lot 6?
No. Actually, we didn't even count this in our parking requirement. We met the parking requirement internal to the site, so we didn't even count the on-street parking that is both here, and then there's some spots also proposed for Han Drive.
I thought we had a discussion about off-street parking, so, okay.
Commissioner Hanson.
I'm sorry, but I forgot what I was going to ask you, so it must not have been that important.
We'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Quinney.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned Denver as a city you've done this. Is there a city that you can point us to that we'd be familiar with that would be comparable to West Jordan, just so we can get an idea of the scope of what we're looking at? I think saying Denver's gigantic, right, compared to West Jordan. So, if we could look at it and say something that we're familiar with that makes sense, maybe we could wrap our heads around this as to being appropriate for what we're looking for, as opposed to kind of getting so stuck in this parking issue.
So forgive me, I misspoke when I said Denver, and specific to this type of development. This type of development around a light rail station in a more suburban context, a city like West Jordan, is really what I meant to say. in the Denver metro area. So for instance, Aurora, we're doing one at Colfax and I-225, which is right off of the light rail, adjacent to the VA hospital. And there we're parking at an even lower ratio than 1.3 to 1. We've developed these types of sites in South Metro Denver, in the Denver, like just south of the Denver Technical Center. Once again, smaller communities, smaller areas, and have consistently found them to park at that 1.3 ratio. We have projects that we've actually built with higher parking, like 1.6 or 1.7 to 1, and then done parking studies later and counted all the empty spots 3 different times during peak usage of the parking itself, and consistently found them to be overparked with empty parking spots. So this we've been actually surprised at some of these sites that there has been so many empty parking spots there. It is definitely a model moving in a certain direction, and it's not to everyone's liking. Not everyone wants to live in a denser community like this, and that's okay. There's a lot of choices out there, but there are people who do want to live in denser, more urban-friendly, more pedestrian-friendly environments, and this is exactly what will appeal to them.
Thank you. Mr. Murray, for efficiency, could you please help us clarify what latitude do we have in relation to this parking conundrum here, where the initial application was, for lack of a better term, grandfathered at a 10-to-1 ratio as opposed to now 4-to-1? It seems like our conversation is centering mostly on parking. What latitude do we have in designating any change there?
Right, so there's 2 different kinds of ordinances. I mean, there's those ordinances that have general citywide applicability, and those are for the most part codified in our city code. And then we have ordinances such as the ordinance that approved the development plan for this development, which is an ordinance that's specific to just this development. It has the same legal effect, but just over a smaller geographic area. And it does supersede the ordinance of general applicability for those terms in which it's different. So if the generally applicable ordinance says 4-to-1 and this one says 10-to-1, then this development plan would govern for this area. So at this juncture, the only issue is what does the development plan say, and does the terms, or do the terms of this site plan meet the terms of that development plan ordinance? If they meet the plan, then the parking is sufficient. If someone can identify that the way this site plan mentions parking does not meet the terms of the development plan, then there is an issue or a problem. So really that's the only thing is, does it meet the development plan? If so, good, discussion over. If it doesn't meet the development plan, then it needs to be corrected to fit it.
Thank you. And then just to clarify, development plan meaning 4-to-1 ratio or 10-to-1 ratio?
Right, exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, right, yeah, exactly.
Right. Commissioner Hanson.
I apologize, I now remember. You talk about putting in more commercial as this development grows and you have more tenants living there. Will all of your commercial development be just for the tenants living there, or it will be open to the public?
The areas, the commercial developments that are here in yellow are commercial enterprises. So they will be open to the public. They will be developed for the public.
Will they
coffee shop could go into one of those spaces, for instance.
So they wouldn't be on the ground floor of an apartment, is that correct?
I do not believe that any of these blocks would develop as apartment blocks because of the shape and configuration of them. So I don't think that that's likely to happen. I think that they are likely to be commercial lots of state.
Because I do agree with you. In an apartment complex, if you've got a commercial on the bottom floor, it's different than a condominium. You've got people moving in and out, and your commercial isn't going to do real well with the constant noise and people above them in an apartment. But if they're separate, I think that's a much better plan. And so that was my question, to see if they were going to be open to the public or just private for the use of the tenants there. Thank you.
Commissioner Luthi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One last question for you. At what point do you anticipate the commercial coming in? Do you have a certain phase that you're anticipating that that's going to be part of, or is it just a we'll see when somebody comes knocking kind of an approach?
It is market driven.
Okay.
Well, would you like to take a break and sit down?
Love to. Thank you.
Get a drink. Thank you very much for answering our questions. We appreciate your time. Mr. Page, do you have anything that you'd like to add or clarify for the city?
As I understand the ordinance of 13-6G-9, that the Planning Commission may grant a reduction in the required parking upon the recommendation from the zoning administrator based on certain factors such as the size of the housing units, by number of bedrooms, the cost range of units proposed, the owner, tenant characteristics and lifestyle, if they be single or couple or families, professionals, size of the project, proximity to transit stations, transportation alternatives, workplace relationships, handicap requirements, restrictive covenants, and availability of approved on-street parking for required guest parking. So, as I understand the ordinance, there is some latitude for the Planning Commission to grant some leeway towards the parking requirements upon the recommendation of the zoning administrator.
So I'm going to ask the question to the zoning administrator, are you making that recommendation?
I'm following the development plan that was approved in 2010 under that ordinance. There's a reason that developers build phased developments such as this. They go into an agreement in 2010 to develop the acreage of this site with a certain type of development they have in mind, specifically for the reason that they don't want to get 7 or 8 years down the road and all of a sudden have to play by a new set of rules. And so what I'm looking at is the 1/10 is what I believe is the appropriate parking ratio that we look at, and the only one that we look at for visitor parking at this time. That was the ordinance in effect, and that's what the city made in agreement with the developer at that time, and I feel that we need to follow that agreement.
And the 1-to-10 ratio being on-street parking would be part of that?
Yes, because in the Jordan Valley TOD, your on-street parking is allowed, but is not only allowed but encouraged as a portion of the development to slow traffic speeds, to encourage walkability. In fact, when the subdivision last year, if you recall, for Lot 5 or Lot 6, I believe, came in, there was on one side on-street parking omitted, and we went back and referenced that development plan that on-street parking needs to be put back in, and it is encouraged, not only from a planning perspective, but also our traffic engineer weighed in on that, and it makes a very, very much more walkable, vibrant, transit-oriented development when you encourage on-street parking and you're not trying to basically warehouse cars in under a building or in a large expanse of asphalt. So, yes.
Well, thank you. So understandably, it can be unfair to change the rules in the middle of the game. Curious on the length of time, because this has gone on since 2010. I thought
15 years.
Is it 15? Thank you, because I know we have different years for different things. Glad you're keeping it all straight. Thank you. Commissioner Luthi.
Just one more question to Mr. Gardner with that same discussion. Does this have anything to do with our West Jordan City standards of no overnight parking during certain months? Does that play into this at all? Is that not a problem?
You mean as far as on-street parking?
Right, for snow removal and such, does that become a problem? Are they still held to those same rules where they can't have on-street parking during winter months?
I do not know. Nate may or may not have an answer to that. I certainly don't. So,
Okay. Just curious more than anything.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, they'd have to, with it being a public street, it would have to follow the rules of other public streets, and so now you don't have those parking spaces. Overnight.
You're not going to have overnight parking.
yes, but there's adequate parking for the tenants. So,
Thank you. Well, being noticed as a public meeting, let's open this to anyone who would like to comment on this item. Please come forward to the podium. Seeing none, we'll close the public comment section and ask the applicant, is there anything else that you would like to mention before we bring it back to deliberation by the Planning Commission? If you could please state your name and address, sir. Thank you.
Jeffrey Vitek, 2121 South McClellan, Salt Lake City. I'm the CEO and president of Boulder Ventures. Commission, thanks for having me. I can tell you that we anticipated some robust discussion about parking. Having just developed 270 units across the street, there were 352 dedicated parking stalls. We didn't distinguish between guests and residents, about the same ratio. At 95% occupied, we had over 100 vacant stalls on an overnight by overnight basis. And so when you add to that, there are 952 additional UTA stalls, irrespective of how UTA may choose to operate from time to time, and then add to that street parking with or without overnight ordinances. We thoughtfully considered how to apportion parking in dwelling units, where this isn't an issue of trying to cost save, it's trying to develop into a future-proof building. And so we're happy to provide a robust amount of parking, and in fact, in this particular business line, it's counterintuitive for us to not adequately park. If that's the case, then our units don't get rented and the project's not viable. So we think about these things quite a lot. As you can tell, we have quite a lot more acreage and many more phases to bring before you, and so we are paying quite a lot of attention. But the best comparison, Commissioner Quinney, we think, is what was built across the street. And with 100 extra spaces for 270 units, we think this is a pretty good apportionment. As far as the commercial concerns, I've been before the body for 20 years now. I've built over 2 million feet of retail in your city, and I'm a big retail supporter. We'd like nothing more than to bring commercial, whether it's office professional or retail commercial or a mixture of both. But we also know that there has to be enough sustainable population to have the businesses be viable. So it's in our economic and planning interest to bring those to you. We're working in earnest with the hospital and with some direct users. But our belief is by building a quality residential community with amenities in each building and each community, that will foster a commercial demand, office professional otherwise. So that's our goal.
Great. Thank you for the additional information. Well, let's bring it back to the Planning Commission for deliberation, leading to a motion. Commissioner Green.
If I were on this Planning Commission 7 years ago, I'd be voting no against this thing. This is a terrible project. But we're saddled with 7 years of other things that have occurred in this city. To be honest with you, the commercial is an afterthought in this project. Put off in a corner and said, oh, we're going to put it in. But that's my perspective. The buildings have to stay at 60 feet or less. That's the ordinance. I don't feel like we ought to be inclined to modify the ordinance to 63 feet 8 inches. Unless somebody decides we really have to do that, I think we can limit the height to the ordinance. We've seen some issues with this development over the last 7 years that I think we need to hold to the ordinance as close as we can. And so, although I might have to vote for this, I don't want to vote for it. I don't think we've created a walkable community, that it's a bunch of apartments and townhomes next to a train station. And I don't see that being very walkable. But that's my perception. So that's my 3 cents.
Commissioner Quinney.
Thank you. I'm going to respectfully disagree with you. I think that this actually is a good project. I'm looking at this In terms of where I work in Salt Lake, right along the main tracks line that heads up to the university, all of the apartment complexes that are developing are in a similar fashion. They're going up, the parking's underneath, and I look at it and I think if everybody in this building had their 1 point whatever stalls per unit that they could park on the streets would be crowded. I understand the flow here, but honestly, it's unimportant to me that it's on the street. I think this is a great project. We've got proof across the street that the parking is not being utilized, even if as is being provided. And I think it's a great project. As far as the building height goes, I don't see why we need to stick it to them for 3.8 feet. You know, that to me doesn't make sense. You know, understand, but we have the latitude to make that change. So to me, if it's 3.8 feet to get a great project in here and to continue to be a good partner with this company that wants to develop in our city and not only this project but further down the road, I don't see why we would want to stick it to them for 3.8 feet. That's my 2 cents, or my 3 cents in this case.
Mr. Page, not presuming that you're an architectural, guru, but shaving off 3 to 4 feet, what impact would that have on the overall elevation?
Well, I would be the first to second that I'm not an architectural guru. But I guess my opinion would be somewhat similar to Commissioner Quinney's, that looking at the overall scale of this project, yes, it's 3 feet 8 inches above 60 feet, but it's also considerably less than the 80 feet that you could go up to. I know attention is in the devil's in the details. I would guess that over the course of 5 stories, that 3 feet 8 inches could make a significant difference in the quality of the project. That would be my opinion.
Thank you. Commissioner Drain.
So I guess my question is, the applicant testified building was going to be 55 feet high, yet the staff report says it can go to 63.8. Which one is the bottom line truth on this? Are we going 63 feet 8 or are we going 55? And can we ask him?
We need to suspend the rules, or Mr. Page could answer that.
If I could clarify, the 57 feet 7 inches is the height of the buildings on Lot 1, and the 53 feet 6 inches is the height of the buildings on Lot 2. So
But we don't have any buildings on Lot 1 and 2.
Yeah, it's well, that is what's somewhat confusing. It's the existing
3 and 4.
3 and 4, right?
We're talking about the Nuvie apartments then.
Correct. Yeah. So these will be, 3 feet, about 6 feet higher than the highest of the existing apartments.
Okay. Can we suspend the rules and have the applicant address that issue? I move that we suspend the rules so that we can have the applicant address that issue.
Commissioner Quinney?
Second.
Any discussion? Vote, please. All in favor of suspending the rules, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously 7-0. Could we please have a representative from the applicant come up and address that issue? Thank you.
So I'm going to have to plead a little bit of confusion on my part as well. Insofar as I understand the height and what to measure to, the lowest point to the highest, we put the highest part of the building at the lowest part of the site. I feel like that height there isn't even at 63 feet, but I'd have to go back into the computer, measure it myself to verify it for you. I will tell you that the height of this part of the building is actually even less than Novi, because Novi has those roof elements that project higher, and we're a flat roof at this location. So our building is generally lower than Novi. What 3 foot 8 inches does, I mean, we could eliminate this volume or reduce this volume at the rooftop deck and lower this element of the building if we are indeed higher than 63 feet, so that we were just barely under 60 feet. But I think the importance of this corner as an entryway and gateway feature into the project, the volume and spectacular space that it creates for the residents as well as for the people who are coming into this project warrant and justify an additional 3 feet and 8 inches. So that's what I would argue there in terms of that. The rest of the bulk of this building easily fits within the 60 feet.
So I have a quick question. In the design review committee, we talked about this, and I don't remember hearing it today. Talk about what's on that upper level as far as an amenity for, I mean, we've got the leasing office down here, but that top floor where we're talking now about 3 feet 8, tell me again what that is.
So we haven't programmed it completely out, but there will be at least 2 grills up at this level. There will be seating. There'll be an indoor kitchenette area where a party could be catered from in this area. We will have glass doors that will open full height to allow an indoor-outdoor party space, but it'll also be broken down so that even if there isn't a party going on at this location, there'll be use throughout the evening hours at this location. And these are by far the best views of the mountains from the entire project. The views of the mountains from this location are really phenomenal.
So what we're talking about is 3 feet 8 inches being an accommodation for additional amenities for the residents, not just some projection on the building that's going up tall to say, hey, look at us, we're here.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Gardner.
And so as I look at the site plan, the only portion that's at 63 6 inches is that, in fact, that roof covering the upper deck recreation area. The rest of the building is at 58 feet, and as Mr. Miller said, this point is actually at the lowest point, and so if we were to average all 4 corners, the whole thing would be well under 60 feet, and so I don't, if we were to go from the grade of the property. And so,
Good point. So what you're saying, to clarify, is this could actually sit lower than the
yes,
opposite end.
because there's 10 feet of fall from the one end to the other, and so I don't think it's out of character one bit for this project. So.
And in a way, if it weren't higher, then it might look funky being lower because of the slope. Pros and cons both ways. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Commissioners.
One question, please, from Commissioner Hanson.
Is this the only building you're going to be doing this on, or will you be doing it on future buildings also?
So we have not started to develop the plans for this lot at this location. We are intending the architecture to be similar. There's certain elements of this that certainly make sense to mirror across the street. So this feels kind of a cohesive street front and a cohesive multi-part development. What I will say is that this is the low part of this site, and there's even more fall across this site. There's 12 feet of fall across this site. So this corner could very well, once again, potentially be above that 60-foot threshold, just on the basis of from that grade coming up to the high part of that. This is really the location where that public entry and that kind of feature corner wants to be for this project. So I think potentially we could be asking once again to be allowed to, on that corner, be above 60 feet.
Because I don't have, I agree that is an added amenity to that, but I hate to say, okay, we're going to go with 63.6 or whatever the number is, and then throughout your whole development, such as changing it from 4 to 1, now it's 1 to 10. I don't want to keep changing this master development plan. If we change it for this building, which I have no problem doing because I think it is amenity, I just hate to see us constantly changing throughout this whole development to allow you to do something that wasn't approved in the master development plan.
So I don't know if this is out of order or not for me to ask the the attorney a question, but I believe that the ordinance itself says that it shall be 60 feet maximum height. However, there is an allowance to go to 80 feet per approval by the planning commission. You're not actually changing the ordinance. Within the ordinance itself is a mechanism for you to approve a height between 60 and 80 feet, individual vote by vote or project by project situation.
That's correct, as I understand it.
I would just hate to see you come and say, oh, well, this is going to be 80, and, you know, we've already given you, you know, 3.5 feet.
Once again, it would be on a project by project specific vote. If we came in here and we asked, could we go to 80 feet, and you could say, yeah, this is justified because you've done a great project here, or maybe we were able to bring in some first floor commercial and that justified the additional height. Or you could say, at this juncture, we don't think that this is appropriate for this project. By voting for approval for this additional 3 foot 8 inches on this project, it doesn't open the door to automatically approve it for any other subsequent projects.
That's correct. If you approve this tonight, it does not require that you approve any additional amounts later. So you wouldn't have to approve over 60 foot in the subsequent phase just because you approved of it in this phase.
Well, that worried me because of the parking. I mean, we changed the parking and it's throughout the whole thing now. So I wanted to make sure we weren't going to cover the whole site with this same ordinance. So thank you.
Thanks for the additional clarifications. Coming in from Colorado, we wanted to make sure you get your time and money's worth there. Right?
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioners.
Commissioner Green.
So back to Mr. Murray. If we want to approve this, do we have to make a specific approval exceeding the 60 feet?
No. If you made a motion to approve of the site plan, then it's implied that it would cover that as well. I mean, if you wanted to call that out separately, you certainly could, but you don't need to.
Thank you. Please feel free to have a seat, Mr. Miller. Thank you. Commissioner Quinney.
I think you answered my question. So we could say, we don't need to say allow it, but say maybe not let it be more than the 63 feet 8 inches.
Right.
They have the latitude to go up to, but not to exceed.
I think that's the more important issue is limit if you are increasing into that range of 60 to 80 and you want to limit it to a certain amount like 64 feet or 63 feet 8 inches or whatever, certainly putting that specific condition in your motion is a good idea.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Open for a motion. Would anyone like to tender a motion? Commissioner Quinney.
I will go ahead and make a motion. It doesn't look like anybody else has anything to add. Based on the findings set forth in the staff report and upon the evidence and explanations received today, I move the Planning Commission approve the preliminary site plan for Upper West Apartment Development at Jordan Valley TOD Building 5, Lot 6, located at 3283 West Jordan Line Parkway, subject to the conditions contained in the staff report with the additional condition that the building height not exceed 63 feet 8 inches.
Commissioner Luthi.
I second.
Discussion to the motion, starting with Commissioner Hatch.
I think we need to put in there that it's 64 feet or 63.8 seems splitting hairs. I think if 64 feet is probably, or even 65 is more reasonable. And I want to say this is a fantastic development. I have some argument with the commissioners on lot size, and I think we're headed to more dense housing. So thank you for doing this in West Jordan.
Commissioner England.
I would echo the same comments. You know, I've been in the building industry myself. You get down splitting hairs at 63. I've heard the numbers 63.6 tonight. I've heard 63.8. I think if we limit it to 64 or 65 feet, I think that would be appropriate.
Thank you. Commissioner Quinney, would you be amenable to a friendly modification to that? Commissioner England, could you please? Thank you.
I think it's unnecessary, but I'm going to go ahead and agree 64 just so we can get this done with.
Thank you. Any other discussion to the motion? Let's vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously 7-0. Thank you for doing business in West Jordan. We appreciate you contributing to our community. Commissioner Luthi.
Thank you for answering all of our questions.
Commissioner Green.
So we'll let's bring this up in the next meeting, but if you all remember the joint council planning commission session a few months ago, we decided that we'd take a look at the PC zone. And so if there's anybody, if you'll think about it, maybe next month we can talk about who wants to work on that particular project.
Great, thank you. And we do have a fifth Tuesday this month on the 30th. And so I'll be in contact with our city council counterparts to see if we're going to have a joint meeting on the fifth Tuesday. Anything else? Or I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Commissioner Quinney.